Hi everybody, in this lesson I'm going to show you the best advanced phrases to help you sound like a pro when presenting in English. We'll look at phrases for giving more details about your topic, persuading, giving recommendations, and much more. At the end of the lesson, I'll share lots of extra tips on how to make your presentations more interesting. And now let's look at our first phrases talking about the background of your presentation topic. Before I delve into the specifics, let me provide some broader context for why this topic matters. To delve into something means to examine something carefully in order to discover more information about it. Before we move on to the specifics, let me paint a picture of the broader landscape. To paint a picture of the broader landscape is a nice phrase which means to give a detailed overview of the background of the topic. And one more example, let's rewind the clock and explore how this topic has evolved over time. Great, and now let's move on to transitioning phrases. Now we also call these signposting phrases because we use them to guide our audience through the different stages of the presentation. For example, to let them know when we're finished with one topic and starting with another. Now that we've discussed the background, let's delve deeper into, or before we wrap up this section, I want to touch on. To touch on something means to briefly mention a topic without going into too much detail. And one more example, building on what we just discussed, let's explore. You can learn lots more examples of signposting phrases in one of my other lessons. I'll put a link in the description below. Excellent. Now let's take a look at some phrases for giving examples. Let me walk you through an example of how can be applied. Or, I'd like to give you a concrete example of how has been applied in. And, to make this more concrete, let me give you an example from. Great. Next we have some very useful phrases that we use when talking about visual aids. Let's take a closer look at this image to better understand. Or, as you can see in this chart, there's a clear pattern emerging. Or, let me walk you through this infographic which summarizes our findings. And, this slide provides a visual summary of the main points we've covered. Next up, we have phrases for elaborating, when we need to give more detail. I'd like to delve a bit deeper into this topic by discussing, or, to give you a better understanding of this concept, let me break it down further. I'd like to offer some additional insight into this topic by discussing, and one more, to flesh out this idea, let me provide some more detail on. To flesh out is another way of saying to give more details. Great, now let's look at some phrases we can use when we're referring to research. A number of studies have demonstrated that, or the latest research indicates that. Many experts in the field agree that, and one more, a study conducted by found that. Next we have comparing and contrasting. While may seem similar to at first glance, a closer inspection reveals some key differences. At first glance is a nice phrase which means when you look at something quickly for the first time. There are a number of similarities between and, but the differences are worth noting. It is important to distinguish between and because. Excellent. Now let's take a look at some phrases we can use to talk about analyzing and evaluating information. By taking a closer look at the data, we can better understand the factors driving this trend. This analysis highlights the strengths and weaknesses of our current strategy. And by examining the results from different perspectives, we can gain a more comprehensive understanding of the issue at hand. The next section is really important, so we have 6 examples. It's all about persuading and convincing. By working together, we can overcome any challenges that arise. I'm confident that this strategy will position us for long-term success. It's time for us to take bold action and make a real difference. And here are some more examples using rhetorical questions. Why settle for good when we can achieve excellence? To settle for something means to accept something that is not as good as what you really want. Are we content with the current situation, or are we ready to push beyond our comfort zone and strive for something greater? Content is another word for happy or satisfied, and to strive for something means to try very hard to achieve something. And one more example, wouldn't it be better to invest now and reap the benefits later? To reap the benefits means to enjoy the rewards or positive outcomes of your efforts or actions. Excellent. Next up, we have some great phrases for talking about solutions. An effective way to tackle this problem is to implement. One possible solution to address this issue would be to. In order to overcome this obstacle, we need to explore alternative solutions such as. Moving on, let's take a look now at phrases for talking about recommendations. We recommend prioritizing the following actions. Based on our analysis, we strongly recommend implementing. And, in light of the evidence, we suggest that the best course of action is to. In light of is a common formal phrase which means considering or thinking about. Next up, we have some great phrases you can use when answering questions. I understand your concern. Let me clarify by saying that. Or, you've raised a valid point. Let me provide more insight into that topic. And I'm glad you brought that up. It gives me the opportunity to emphasize. Make sure to check the video description for a link to another lesson with more tips on answering questions. And if you'd like to get lots of great tips on how to make your presentations more interesting, watch this lesson next.